Hi everyone, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. We're here to talk about a phrase that gets thrown around constantly in women's football right now, which is professionalisation. It's on every panel, it's in every headline, and it's usually spoken about as this beautiful, inevitable destination. But if you're actually working inside a performance department in the women's game today, you know that the reality on the ground is a lot more complicated than the media makes it look. When you strip away the noise, there are really three things happening at the same time in our sport. Firstly, there's the gap. Let's be honest about it. The game has professionalized faster than the infrastructure. Performance teams are being asked to meet an elite world-class standard, but often without the headcount, the budgets, or the tools to match. It's not a lack of ambition, it's simply that the foundational investment is still playing catch-up. Which leads us to the reality. Right now, at the vast majority of the clubs across EMEA, we don't have massive specialized sports science departments. In fact, most clubs have one or two people carrying the weight of an entire performance function. When you are stretched that thin, you don't always have the luxury of time. Decisions often have to be made on pure instinct because there simply aren't enough hours in the day to do it any other way. But despite that pressure, there's also a massive shift happening. The practitioners entering these roles today are highly qualified, deeply motivated, and they aren't settling for that's just how it's always been done. The real question for the game right now isn't when the investments will arrive, it's how we build the right habits and the right culture now so that when the infrastructure catches up, the foundations are already there. And that's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with Chris and Molly as they're navigating this shift every single day at Bristol City Women. Chris Difford is the head of performance services and Molly is a sports scientist at Bristol City Women. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Hannah.
Chris, let's start with you. You've been building this department at Bristol City from the ground up. When people look at the club from the outside, they see a professional setup. But what did it actually look like when you walked through the door? And what were the immediate gaps you realised you had to fill?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So it's been I've been in the post, just for context for everyone on the call. I've been in the post since mid-January, so coming up to 4 or 5 months now. The club is in a large transition with the investment of Mercury 13, and as our interim CEO likes to say, we've basically been trying to build a plane mid-flight. So that's what we've been trying to do. So some of the elements that I've sort of walked into were support the current staff structure. So when I walked through the door, Molly and Meg, our sports therapists, were essentially holding the ship. So there was two full-time members of staff, closely followed by a second physical performance coach, and a medical department that sort of really needed support. So one of my initial roles was to sort of provide that support to the medical department. Between now and the end of the season, it was challenging. So we had to find people that were adequate and qualified to support us on an interim basis, part-time basis, and sort of and covering all aspects of the medical department, which was a challenge. The other elements that we sort of focused on in the 4 months since I started was really sort of trying to develop a real clear physical development framework. So when I walked in, Molly had sort of worked with a couple of S&C coaches, and then I came in, and so it was probably a mixture of different methodology throughout the time in the first half of the season. So it was really important for us to have a clear framework and process for the two physical performance coaches to follow and for the players to adapt to for the final part of the season. And the last part, again, going back to the recruitment part, the transition element was recruitment. So we did lose a couple of members of staff in the transition, but also made new positions available. So a large part of my role in the 4 months is actually recruiting members of staff to sort of pad out our department. So we do have a lead physio, 2 sports therapists now, and a performance and wellbeing manager coming in to support the 2 sports science and S&C coach that we've got in the sort of performance and medical element.
Thank you, Chris. Moving on to Molly. So when Chris is managing that big picture, you're out there on the grass and in the gym. When you have sort of one person essentially covering multiple roles, like yourself, what did that day-to-day reality look like for you early on?
Yeah, so as Chris said, that for a significant period of the season, there were actually just 2 full-time members of staff in the medical and performance department. that meant that we were involved in not just the planning and programming, but also delivery on pitch. And then we were also the main point of call for logistics, being the only members of staff in each department. Other staff members came to us to sort out more like the timings and the building and what access to facilities we needed. In terms of on pitch, I was leading sort of team warm-ups. I was doing rehab sessions with players whilst also trying to do the live monitoring of the GPS. I think as you're stretched across multiple areas, obviously you can't go into the same level of detail as you would like. But it was a bit of a sink or swim sort of period. It was we had to quickly develop sort of our organisation skills, have good communication between the two of us, and they're things that we also tried to carry on as our staffing group got a lot bigger. For me in my role, because I was also sort of leading in the gym, when I was analysing and downloading the GPS and heart rate data, that took place a lot later on in the day than maybe the coaches would have liked. So I was spending a lot less time on my role whilst I was picking up responsibilities outside of that. But yeah, so I was really pleased when Chris came in and sort of helped recruit to a full department.
Nice. So what's so interesting about what you both just said is that having a lean team means you can't just rely on sheer manpower, I guess, to get things done. You can't just throw people at a problem. This leads on to my next point is if you want things to work, the environment itself has to do some of the heavy lifting. So if we look at this from a holistic angle, thinking about driving accountability and elite habits from the ground up, this really seems to start with the people that are already in the building. Molly, in a fast growing environment, how did you or how do you build accountability with the players so they take a little bit more ownership of their own preparation and recovery rather than sort of just waiting to be told what to do, which sounds like it might have been really important in those cases where you were split over so many roles. The players having that accountability would have been even more important in this case.
Yeah, I think for female players especially, they need to understand the what, the why, and the how. So they've got to understand what's expected of them, why it's important, and then how it translates to the performance. I think once they have an understanding of all three of them, most of the time they're bought in and they have ownership of their own actions. I think data is really powerful in starting that conversation. I think if you can show a player their trends in fatigue or readiness markers and help them see what you see, and then also see the gaps and why they're needed, I think that's a great way of getting their buy-in, and helps reinforce your message. I think you can also use peer accountability. I think that's a powerful tool. I think using your senior players, your high influence players, like maybe ones that play 90 minutes consistently, pick up few injuries and are already doing those healthy habits that you're trying to enforce. I think that's the ultimate goal because you you ultimately want the players to set the standards for themselves rather than you having to police them. Um, and I'm keen to give them as much autonomy as you can. I think giving them small choices where if it's you're giving them a set of recovery strategies and they can pick their own, I think that gives them that ownership and I think that breeds accountability.
Nice, thank you, Molly. You mentioned sort of the what, why, and the how, and you mentioned sort of you touched on showing those trends. For our listeners that are on right now, would you mind just going into a little bit more detail of sort of how you go through that process with the players that you have? So how you tell them what sort of you're monitoring, sort of the why and the how. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so if I stick with the recovery example, we typically do CMJ testing on a match day +2 and a -1. And we do that every week consistently. I think I've then shown the players how they've trended over time and how maybe there's a downward trend as they're picking up more minutes. And I think that opens the conversation of, okay, what are you doing on your days off, and how much time are you dedicating towards your recovery? I think you can, like, comparisons with other players are useful to see. Go, this players that obviously doing the recovery that we're asking of them, they're trending much higher than you. So ultimately, that's why it's a benefit, and that's why we're asking you to do these things.
Thank you. So that was a really good insight into sort of how you work when you're the person on the ground. Chris, a huge part of professionalisation is staff alignment. How do you ensure that the performance department, the medical team, and the coaching staff are actually speaking the same language rather than operating in silos that we often see quite a lot across different teams?
Yeah, thank you. Something we're going through considerable amount this summer with all the staff that I mentioned that are coming in the building for us to be paired properly for next season. It's vital that we're operating collaboratively and we're discussing all things performance as a group to essentially get the best outcome for the players and the coaching staff to then hopefully will be shown on the pitch at the weekend. So the three key areas we've been working on are to provide staff within the performance department, but also across to the coaching department as well, as clear roles and responsibilities for two reasons really. One, for that person, that individual, to have the autonomy to go on and build within their discipline, how they want to frame their work, and as Molly's mentioned, how she wants to work with players and give them the autonomy that they need to be able to compete and perform at their best, but also to ensure there's no blurred lines in different job roles. So if there's two PPCs or an S&C and a sports scientist, or a sports scientist and a medical lead and or sports therapist, that they're not doing each other's jobs and each other's roles. It's real clear that it should be clear that who's it sort of who is able to do each role and when, to avoid that. The other ones would be, as Molly's already mentioned, she's developed this with Meg before my time here, but she's sort of bringing this to the table now in the summer, is clear lines of communication and opportunities to share information. So we are implementing regular MDT meetings. So before the end of the season, we did a 10-minute at the start of every day of a medical performance meeting, just to understand where players were for that day, and if there's any influential changes to training that we have to let the coaches know. And then and to next year, when we have more time and more staff, what we'll look to do is have a weekly preview. So every Friday we will then essentially preview the week ahead, and we'll be discussing all things medical, rehab and performance, and then maybe some reviewing of the previous week, and then basically so everyone's aligned and collaborated on the week ahead and what the performance outcomes are for that week. And then last one is the most important one, I think, is integrating the performance services in with the football philosophy. So I have a vision, and I believe that the performance services shouldn't be an add-on to the football philosophy. They should be very much integrated and as part of one, all part of one whole holistic goal, which is to win games at the weekend and be successful as a group. So in terms of what I mean by that is, so when the players come in of a morning, they'll obviously come in for breakfast, and then from that point, everything they do should be essentially towards performance and winning at the weekend. So they'll go into a team meeting, which is obviously heavily involved in sort of the tactical and technical content or reviewing of games. They'll come into a prep to perform session or prehab session, ready for the training session, which has specific and individualized needs for each player, with a goal for the physical outcome of the day. So they're preparing for that. They then go out to the pitch, and they'll go with the S&C or Molly herself to complete a warm-up, or we call it internally a physical development warm-up. But the key for that is there needs to be a physical outcome, and it has to be then integrated with the first action of the football training session. So, for example, if it's deceleration or acceleration related, we'll teach the players or coach the players how to best do those actions, but then relate it to a sporting moment in the game that aligns with the football philosophy. And then that theme should then follow out through the coaches into the football specific trainer sessions, essentially.
Thank you, Chris. I really like those 3 points, and I think a lot of people that listening can take those in. So just to recap, that was sort of everyone that you are hiring and currently within the department has the clear roles and responsibilities outlined. You have the daily and weekly sort of MDT communication so that everyone is aligned. And then thirdly, you have your physical outcome alongside the football. So there's always that sort of context to why a player is being asked to do what they're doing. Before I move on, Chris, how do you find the coaches that you're working with? How are they aligned with the physical output? Do you sort of do a physical first approach and then plan the training around that? Or is it sort of how to get the physical output from the sessions that the coaches are designing?
Yeah, good question. It's a chicken and egg scenario. My personal opinion is we're here to support the coaching staff and the manager in their football philosophy. So for me, it's understanding the manager that you're working with, what they want their team to look like, how they want their team to train from a training week perspective, a periodization plan, and then for us as a performance department, find the best way of doing that and bringing that to life. Obviously, within that, there's conversations and challenges within, essentially healthy challenge between coaches and performance staff, what we think is best from a purely physical perspective, what they want from a technical or tactical perspective. But I think that brings and breeds collaboration. And I think if you develop a physical model where you're integrating physical with the football, you should be aligned, and it's a lot easier. But yeah, we're here to support the manager the best way we can. All the coaches staff, we'll develop a physical program around what they want their players to look like, and then with that, it should bring a lot of collaboration in the way that we can work together and sort of both have the end goal that we desire, which is players that are robust and can play as many minutes as possible in the way that the football coaching team or football philosophy is desired on a match day.
Nice. So I think everything you've just spoken about is sort of relates to this culture, right, of the club and setting the standards sort of from day one. And both of you, can you share a specific moment where you saw a culture shift at Bristol City Women? So maybe a moment where a player or a coach did something unprompted that made you think, okay, the standard has officially been raised here.
Yeah, I'll go first because it kind of tags on to Chris's point before. I think for me, that was when Charlotte was appointed. She's someone that's got great knowledge and experience in the WSL and has also seen how important the performance side is to getting the best out of the players on the pitch. So she was really driving that alignment between the performance and the coaching staff so that we are getting that integrated model where after a training session we're both happy from a physical and a technical tactical point of view.
Chris, anything to add there?
Yeah, I had a slightly different example actually. The one that I had was, to give context to the people that are listening, we were tasked, well, I was tasked when I came in to make adjustments to the training week. The task and the context around that was around match day +2 and the way that the manager likes to train, having a -3 off. We needed, in my opinion, to train more on a +2. Typically, and rightly so, it was within the 48-hour recovery window. There was a rationale to be more of a recovery session than a training session. My opinion was we needed to change it and train essentially and allow the players to adapt to train more intently on a +2 to allow us to get the physical responses we need throughout the whole training week. That was met with skepticism from the players, which is normal given their education around recovery that's so open and readily available through the great practitioners in the women's game, but also in the professional football environment. And I've been and experienced it myself, so I was expecting some skepticism and some kickback from players, but the bit for me was not necessarily a culture shift, but sort of like a light bulb moment for me was when one of the senior players came up to me and after probably 4 to 6 weeks of sort of steadily progressing the sort of exposure to training on a +2, that the feeling of the group was that they did physically adjusted in their bodies, were able to sort of maintain and cope and train with a +2 session. So that was a big moment for me for them to sort of feel that they were able to train properly on a +2, whereas before they were sort of, yeah, they were unsure and uneasy about training on a +2 as it was typically in the 48-hour recovery window.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. So we've just spoken about sort of how you've built the department up, what's been going well. But I think people will also be interested in hearing what hasn't worked so well. So, Molly, what is there something you used to think was essential for a professional setup that you've now realised is maybe just noise and you can actually do without it? So we're thinking here of people that maybe are even a department of one. What can they do to reduce sort of that noise to try and really just get down to what is the most important?
Yeah, I think one of my biggest reflections is that more data isn't necessarily better. I think each bit of data that you collect has to have a clear purpose and a clear action plan. If a test or a metric doesn't add new information or provide a bit more context towards your decision making, then it's not an effective way to use your time. I think also the more data you collect, the more your attention's diluted and maybe you're missing some of the more important markers. Um, Along the same lines, I think it's easy to get distracted by sort of new trends or buzzwords in sports science, maybe things that you see online or things that other teams are doing. And I think the principles of sports science haven't really changed, so it's easy to get distracted. I mean, by all means, add things to your program, but I think it's important that they don't come at the expense of doing the basics and doing them well and consistently. Um, in my opinion, high performance isn't having the most complex program. It's being able to do the basics well and doing them consistently.
Nice, thank you, Molly. Chris, coming back to you, sort of as this overseeing the department, if there is someone watching who is currently a department of one, and they're trying to transition to the next level, what is the single best piece of advice that you can give them to effectively manage the department's growth while raising the club standards?
Yeah, the one thing for me would be a needs analysis of your department. If you are a one or a two or a three, what does your department need, and what does the business need essentially would be my main ones. Certainly something on my reflections that I've done is trying to fill in the gaps that's required in our environment. But like I say, if it's a singular or two people, that you really need to understand what you already have in the building, what skills or expertise are you missing to get you to the next level, but also will drive the culture and the environment along the way. Every environment will be different, so there's no plug in and play. Whatever I've sort of implemented here at Bristol City, if I was to go to another club, I wouldn't pick it up directly and plop it into a different environment. It would very much be reset. What does the business need? What is the environmental constraints? What do we have in the building, and what do we need to take us to the next level? And then once you sort of answered those questions, it'll give you a better idea of like who the next person is, in what skill set and what discipline will really drive the program to the next level. And then a little bit of context of what I've gone through in terms of the club at the moment, and the transition through the medical department that I mentioned at the start is I identified quite quickly we needed a lead medical person. So we've identified that as a key person, sort of lead from a medical governance perspective, and the people underneath that. And then we've got a sports therapist that has a certain skill set. So there was a clear rationale for another sports therapist or physio to fill in a gap where the skill set that they have would be more pitch-based and end stage rehab that we didn't have in the building currently. So as I was focusing the recruitment on that, that was very much a business need and development of us as a department, and also culturally, and take us to the next level. I tried to recruit someone that had WSL experience, which is a destination we want to get to. So I tried to marry up sort of what the business needs in terms of where we wanted to go, but also from the development of our group and the skill sets they were missing with the development to make a complete and holistic medical department.
You mentioned the sort of needs analysis. How did you go about that when you came back in to Bristol City Women in the world of football, everything moves very fast. So how did you sort of manage the expectations of sort of key stakeholders within the club, where you actually needed to go through the process of a needs analysis, which could take time, also employing the right person? How did you manage sort of that communication of, it's better to slow it down and get the right people than rather than just get people in just for an increase in headcount?
Yeah, good question. Something that I've had to answer and battle in my head quite a few times since I've been here, and I always go back to the same answer is where we are at the stage of the club's progression is we are very much going to be a newborn club. We're going to be a sort of a very different identity and a very different goal. That my job now is to build the foundations for a successful and long future, hopefully in WSL, where we remain competitive for a long period of time. For me to get this wrong now would be essentially setting us up for failure. So I always go back to, I'd rather spend time to get the right people in, the right foundations in, and build on a solid base, as opposed to just getting as many people in as we can to provide a non-optimal or maybe optimal service, but then in 2 or 3 years' time, that all capitulates and we have to start again. So a part of that would be, again, a lot of the remit that I had in terms of the longevity piece would be to retain the staff that we've got, but also build and bring in people that want to stay here for the long term. The club and generally in football, we've gone through a high turnover of staff. So I want to build a department not only want to be here for the long term, but also develop along the journey with us. We are at the very start of our journey, and it's an exciting time for us. And I want us all to experience it together, and hopefully experience the highs that we'll go through in the years to come. So yeah, hopefully that summarised the question.
It's great, thank you, Chris. And yeah, I hope there's many highs for you to be living over the next coming seasons. We're going to open it up now to the audience. So if you have any questions, please just use the chat and we'll go through them. While I give you a little bit of time to submit your questions, I've just got one for either of you, Molly or Chris. So sort of everyone is talking about lack of resources, and sometimes that gets the blame of, this is why this has happened, because of lack of resources. But where does that actually hurt the most? Is it literally not having enough hours in the day? Or is it sort of the frustration of you should be doing something but lacking the tools to do it? Where in your experience has sort of a lack of resource, what has made it the most difficult?
Yeah, I'll go first on this one and I'll let Molly jump in. For me, quite candidly, it's sort of lacking the tools to do the job. I think if you don't have enough hours in the day, and going back to Molly's point of too much data is not necessarily better. If you've got too many hours, if you don't have enough hours in the day, you're probably not focusing on the right things. For me, it's understanding and maximizing the resources you've got, i.e. not collecting every bit of data from every element of what you think you should be collecting. And then once you've understood what the big rocks are for you in whatever your performance targets are, maximizing those resources. And then once you've done that and you do have resources, then you're able to then make better decisions on the bits that will help you have the biggest impact. Again, going back to my previous comment on building foundations, I had the opportunity, fortunately, to have additional resource, i.e. with technology and bits and pieces. I was very much, I want to understand what we do have in the building and building the infrastructure and platform to be able to do that. Once we've got that, then I can make better decisions on what technology will then be able to help us support us throughout the years, as opposed to going technology first, and then not having the manpower and all the time, all the hours to utilize it to its fullest. Molly, did you want to jump in with anything else on that one?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is the frustration between the gap of what's your ideal program, whereas what's realistic. I think there can be quite like simple additions that we want to add to the program that maybe we can't do because we're in a building where we share the gym and equipment with multiple teams. So yeah, that's where I find it most frustrating. But I do have the luxury of, I say to Chris, this is my ideal program, and ask him to try and make it happen or get what's closest to it. But yeah, I think that comes back to the adaptability that Chris said, that if if your number one option doesn't work, then what is plan B and C to still make improvements and still make progress?
I think that leads nicely actually onto the next question that's come through is, if you look at the women's game globally, what is one area of the infrastructure you think is still being massively overlooked that clubs need to start preparing for now? And Molly, you just mentioned sort of the idea of this sharing sort of pitches and gym space. Is that one that you sort of need completely separate infrastructure away from sort of the men's side so that you can train and you can go in the gym at any point? Or is there another aspect of infrastructure that you think needs to be developed as we see sort of this growth within the women's game?
Yeah, I think ultimately that is the end goal. I mean, we can see teams that are building female specific training grounds, and that's great. I mean, we're not there yet. So I think the biggest thing would be sort of in the academy setups for the women's game. There's still a big gap compared to what the boys have. And I think girls are having access to performance support much later than the boys do. I think that's particularly evident when they then do transition up to a professional setup, that you can see that they haven't had S&C, sports science or nutritional support from a young age. I think that's the biggest gap.
So before we move on to the next question, this is coming back to you, Chris, in terms of the department and when you're looking to recruit within there. So we'll have a lot of listeners that are maybe still at university looking to pursue a role in sports medicine, sports therapy, physio, etc. And could you tell them what attributes like you would look for within a practitioner? So is it a technical skill? Is it sort of adaptability to thrive in an environment like you're working in? Is it specific skill set? What do you think the listeners should focus on to be successful within a role or a department that you're working in?
Yeah, no problem. So there are some key attributes that I look for, particularly in the recruitment drive that we've done recently. The first one is, I don't know if you can train for this directly, but be a good person. Like for me, if you're having an office and colleagues that are all good people, it only brings for a better cultural environment. If you get one person doesn't really fit the environment or isn't particularly personable, it is very difficult to work with, and it sort of has a real negative effect on the environment. So the first one would be just be a good person, number one. The next one I would look for is a growth mindset. So for me, that's sort of our stage of our journey where we have got aims and aspirations to be competitive in WSL, and everyone will have a different journey depending on whoever's listening to this webinar. Is bring people on that have a mindset for growth and to go on the journey with you. So I was very much looking at people that are wanting to learn and develop in their own discipline, but also with the club. And that was another big one for me. The other one was, again, going back to Molly's point, and particularly in the women's game, you need to be creative and adaptable with the resources across multiple clubs at all variants levels, whether you're a one-man team or you're at the top of WSL and you've got 20 members of staff. You still need to have that creative element and be adaptable to the scenarios and environments you're chucked into. So like Molly mentioned, we do have days where we have to adapt our program as we are in a shared facility, so we have to. That's a key skill set that we do look for in our members of staff. And then the other one I think is really important is self-awareness. So not only understanding being a good person, but obviously understanding your own strengths and weaknesses can be really powerful, and understanding what you are really good at and what value can bring to the environment, but also what you aren't confident or what you need to improve on, because that can really help shape someone like myself to develop not only your development program to support you on the weaknesses, but actually put you in somewhere where you can thrive with your strengths. And then if I can do that across every single member of staff, I've got a really strong department, and I can support them with the things that they need to then improve on to further enhance them as an individual.
Right, that's a really good list of sort of key attributes that people can sort of work to. Like you say, sometimes in my personal experience at university, it was very theoretical. And yeah, you didn't realize how important those people skills were until you sort of step foot into the training ground environment the first time. And I think, yeah, the most successful people are probably those ones that are very approachable and cover those attributes that you just mentioned. One of the questions in the chat is, maybe this is specific to you, Molly. Do you align physical metrics to your game model?
Yeah, I think mentioned that that's something that Charlotte really wanted to implement when she first came in. I think it also helps to make sure that you're both happy with how training's gone. It's not just the case of, oh, we've hit our technical and tactical objectives, but maybe missed out on the physical. But ultimately, a knowledge of what the coaches are asking for and what the game model demands you should reverse engineer that to plan how you're then going to train for it. So yeah, I'd say definitely having a good knowledge of the game model really helps.
Nice, thank you, Molly. Okay, we'll just give you 30 seconds for our listeners. If you've got any more questions, if you'd like to put them in the chat. Okay, no more questions. So I'm just going to try and summarize what we've discussed today. I won't do as good a job as Molly and Chris can do. I think they've given us some really interesting insights and sort of practical applications of what you can take in to the teams that you're working in. So we discussed this concept of sort of having a clear physical development framework that everyone is aligned on. Molly spoke about the importance of culture and putting the sort of the accountability back on the player by going through a process of like what, why, and how, showing the trends of like the reasons why you're doing certain measures, such as the counter movement jump on a match day -1 and +2. We then spoke with Chris around the concept of building out a department and how it's really important to have those clear roles and responsibilities, communication across all departments rather than just working in silos, and having sort of a physical and football focused outcome. When building that department, you need to start with the needs analysis. And Chris gave us some really good tips on the key attributes of working within a department such as the one at Bristol City. So being ultimately a good person, having a growth mindset, being creative and adaptable, and having that self-awareness. So just to finish up today, before we wrap up, I just wanted to share a little bit about what we're working on at Catapult at the moment. So we've been proud to support women's sport more intentionally over the past year, including benchmarking work with Bristol City and their sister clubs at Mercury 13. We've also just launched a new female Catapult vest built specifically for female athletes in mind, which allows for a less invasive measure of internal load. Catapult's full suite covers athlete monitoring, video analysis, scouting, weight room training, and an education platform. So whether you're just getting started or looking to go deeper, there's something here for your club. If anything resonated with you today, please do reach out. We'd love to help.